Hello, and welcome to Northeast Ohio Medical University. My name is Amy Lee, and I'm the Program Director of the Consortium of Eastern Ohio Master Public Health Program. And we are so pleased to have you here for the kickoff for National Public Health Week. And it is so my pleasure to bring you this presentation. We have Joe Sepesey, who is a native of Youngstown, Ohio, who served 3 combat tours in Vietnam as a U.S. Army helicopter pilot, accumulating 2,200 combat flight hours with the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Aviation Brigade. In 1970, his back was injured when the Huey he was piloting was shot down. 6 spinal operations and several others would be needed beginning in 1984. Joe did not know that he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, until 2006, when he was diagnosed by a Veterans Affairs, or VA, psychologist. Joe began social dancing in 2009 as a result at the age of 59 as a way of dealing with his PTSD. Joe is a former musician, a guitarist, and a polka band with his brothers. He graduated magna cum laude from Youngstown State University in 1977 with a BA in education and taught in the Youngstown City Schools for 30 years. In 2003, Joe was inducted into the Ohio Military Hall of Fame for Valor and received the Ohio Medal of Valor. Joe has published 9 books, including his Vietnam memoir, Once We Flew. Please welcome Joe Sepesey.
Thank you, Amy. Nice job. Thank you. This coat's coming off right now, okay? Welcome to From Battlefields to Ballrooms. And I'd like to thank University NEOMED, Amy Lee, and Linda Amon. Where's she hiding? Oh, there she's waving. Okay, very good. If you are a veteran, please stand. Thank you. If you are a first responder, please stand. None today. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I have PTSD, severe PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. From early 1970 through 1973, at the ages of 19 to 22, I was a U.S. Army helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And there we go. That's the Huey. That's what I flew. I was an aircraft commander with the call sign of Masher 24, and later on, I became my company's flight lead pilot with the call sign Yellow 1. It was my responsibility. I was responsible for the lives of dozens of crewmen and soldiers, and numerous aircraft, of course, and the completion of hundreds of missions. Let's call that my first war, and I attribute its events to my PTSD. Now, let's jump ahead to 1973. After my first war, and now I'm a private citizen. I had to face new situations and responsibilities. And guess what? So begins my second war with PTSD. Now, we're going to weave those 2 wars together, and you'll get to hear my whole story. And please know that the stories you hear, they represent the good, the bad, and the questionable, and you will hear no enhancements and no exaggerations. PTSD is an injury, mental or emotional, inflicted by external forces encountered during natural disasters, first responses, combat, assaults, abuse, accidents, and so on and so on. To further clarify, it is a whole body tragedy, an integral human event of enormous proportions with massive repercussions. This tragedy especially is true in a war environment. Now, relevant to soldiers in war, in World War I, PTSD was known as shell shock. World War II was battle fatigue. And in the Korean War, it was gross stress reaction. In 1980, it was finally recognized by the VA, and that's where we picked up the term PTSD. Now, here's how this tragedy of PTSD manifested itself within me. The results can be encapsulated by the factors of my PTSD, and these are the big ones anyway. Oh, where's the little red dot? Oh, there it is. I'm easily startled by loud or unexpected noises, survivor's guilt, emotional numbing, mistrusting, and confrontations with figures and authority. I'm really good at that. Anger, hypersensitivity to injustice, traumatic-related guilt, and a few others. I will explain how these factors came to formulate this equation. So let's begin with easily startled by loud or unexpected noises. Hi, Stevie. During my first night in Vietnam, I was awakened by a rocket attack. 122 millimeter rockets were crashing down, exploding. I crawled out of my hooch to the bunker, and this baptism of fire lasted maybe 2 minutes with 20 explosions. The ground literally shook, and I had never heard a noise such as this before in my life. I was frightened, I didn't have a weapon, and I was in my underwear. I didn't know what was going on. Although I didn't know it at the time, this is my first PTSD moment while in Vietnam. Here's another incident that involves loud noises. 3 weeks later, I was the co-pilot on a Huey, this Huey, in fact, and we were shot down. One bullet went through the engine. Again, incredible banging and grinding noises. The aircraft commander grabbed the controls, the engine quit, and he managed to get the bird on the ground, although we kind of thudded it in. And this is how my back was injured, and we'll get to that later on, too. Let's move on to survivor's guilt. In my company, we flew a lot in Cambodia during my first tour. And in March of 1971, with just 17 days to go before I would come home, this 37 millimeter anti-aircraft cannon opened up on me in the skies of Cambodia. One shell exploded about 100 feet below me. I evaded it, and thank God, nobody was hit. 3 hours later, that same gun, by the way, this is what the shell looks like. That same gun shot down another Huey exactly where I was, killing all 5 guys on board. I knew the pilot that had to go to the site and retrieve the killed in action soldiers. He told me that the remains that they found, oh, that's the gun again. Oh. Collectively fit in a C rations box. And the biggest piece that they found was a boot, and the foot was still in it. To this day, I wonder how that gun didn't blast me to kingdom come. PTSD moment, emotional numbing. Here's another story that will cause you to question why I'm still alive. Let me set it up for you. I was flying Yellow 1, the leader of a flight of 6 Hueys, on a combat assault. We're going to come in and land on a ridgeline. And 2 Cobra gunships with the call sign Top Cat are covering us. All of a sudden, Yellow 2, who is off my left side, yells, "Taking fire, 9 o'clock low, taking fire." I could still hear his heart in his throat. Before Yellow 2 finished his transmission, Top Cat was rolling in with rocket fire, suppressing the enemy fire. We landed to the ridgeline. The troops jumped off. We took off. We were going back to our base because we had to come back 2 more times. After we take off, Yellow 2 calls me. He says, Joey, check your bird, make sure you're okay. I checked everything. Everything's cool. I turned around and I saw Kenny, my crew chief, and he's sitting there like this. He keyed his mic. He said, "Sir, I should be dead. I didn't even lift my gun. The flare, excuse me, the tracers, big as grapefruits, coming straight at me. I knew I was dead." I turned around and Yellow 2 called me back. And he said, "Joey, I counted 12 or 15 tracers. They went in your left side of behind your head and out the right side of the bird. And this is what a 51 caliber bullet looks like. The top part is about 2 inches long and it'll take your head clean off." Then Top Cat called me. He said, "That's right, Joey, at least a dozen of those tracers went through your bird. Now check this out. The whoops, doggone it. The tracers went in, follow the red arrow. That's about a foot behind my head. And they came out the other side that way. How did those 60 bullets not hit one person on board or even touch the aircraft? I don't know. This is a PTSD moment involving survivor's guilt. Let's move on to emotional numbing. During my first tour, I was running a resupply mission and I had to pick up 12 soldiers who had been killed in action the day before. This was my first encounter with dead American soldiers, and it was a very profound moment. I made 2 trips into that landing zone. They stacked up 6 bodies in the cargo deck at a time. And I remember so distinctly, I kept turning around, checking their hands to see if they had wedding rings on. I don't know why I did that, and I was also thinking about how the chaplains were going to visit their families with the worst possible news. This is a PTSD moment involving emotional numbing. Then there was a medevac that I pulled, and the imagery is still so vivid. I landed and I watched 4 soldiers carry a dead comrade to my bird for medevacing. There was no body bag. He wasn't covered, just his body. The soldier stopped in front of me just for a moment, and a piece of his throat fell to the ground. You don't forget things like this. The dead GI was put on board. He had been decapitated by an RPG, rocket-propelled grenade. He didn't know what hit him, thank God. We took off. I gave the controls to the co-pilot. I said, "Take us to Song Bay to the hospital. Let's go up to 3,000 feet. We're flying in our Huey, and right there, that red arrow is pointing to the cargo deck. That's where a lot of the action took place. It was a beautiful, clear day, but I'm feeling moisture on my neck. I take my glove off. I rub my neck, and it's covered with blood and some kind of goo. I don't know what it is. The rotor wash and wind was whipping around in the cargo deck, causing these fluids that were leaking from the stump to fly around the inside of the bird. This is exactly what I did. Wiped my hand, put my glove on, sat back. And I remember thinking how weird that reaction was. And this foreboding thought involves emotional numbing. Now, sometimes there were humorous stories, and this one involves both loud noises and emotional numbing. There we go. This is my buddy, Randy. Went through flight school together, Vietnam together. He was best man at my wedding 3.5 years ago. Randy and I are in the officers club having lunch. And mortars start falling 20 yards from the officers club. Randy and I jump under the table. There are two new guys with us. They got in under the table a little bit later than us, but mortars are exploding. I look at Randy, Randy looks at me, and we burst out laughing, uncontrollable laughter. We couldn't stop laughing. The siren, all clear siren sounds. We take our seats. We look at each other again, and we start laughing again. And those two new guys said, wonder what the hell is wrong with these two guys? They had to close the club because of the attack. So Randy and I, we're celebrating our halfway point in our tour. 6 months in, 6 months to go. So we got drunk and we finished our celebration in the company area. And just to show you that we weren't, well, we've grown up a bit. That's me and Randy 40 years later. This is a dual PTSD moment: loud, unexpected noises, and emotional numbing. Moving on through my equation: mistrusting and confrontations with the figures of authority. But first, I have to define very briefly what friendly fire is. Friendly fire is when American troops accidentally fire on other American troops. The enemy is not involved there, not at all. So let me tell you what happened here. I was yellow 1 again. I was leading a flight of 6 birds on a combat assault. My co-pilot was a captain named Bobby Voss, and we're being briefed by a major I will call Major Farsick. I'm going to read from my memoir. That major looked dead at me. He said, "If you take fire, it will be friendly fire. So do not return fire." Bobby and I looked at each other. "This is bullshit," I said. "Are there any questions?" asked Major Farsick. "Go ahead, Chief." "Sir, if we take friendly fire, is it okay to return friendly fire? I mean, we can be just as friendly." "Don't get smart with me, mister. You have your orders." I'm not making this up. We were dismissed a few seconds later. Me and Bobby are walking back. Oh, I'm supposed to be reading. "Bobby, this isn't right," I said. "This is how people get killed." Bobby agreed with me and suggested we had just received an illegal order. We were told to ignore standing rules of engagement. I could have cranked up my yellow flight right then and there and left. But after some thought, I decided to run the mission and employ standard rules of engagement. In other words, to hell what the major said. Wouldn't you know it? We took fire coming in. Thank God, though, it wasn't from the village that was near the landing zone. It was from the mountain behind us that we had just crossed in front of. We returned fire. Nobody was hit. After we departed, I called the major up and requested a mission release. He said, "Thank you very much. Go on home." Okay. When we got home, I reported the incident to my commanding officer, and there were no repercussions. And he said, "You could have walked away from that mission, Joey. You could have just flown home with all 6 of our birds." PTSD moment: not trusting figures of authority. I had a few more encounters with high-ranking officers that involved mistrust and confrontation. And I would encounter more. But now, jumping to 1973, when I'm out of the Army, here are a couple war-related mistrusting and confrontation with figures of authority again, but I'm a civilian now. And we're throwing anger in to the equation. I thought I had closed the book on Vietnam, but I had 2 epilogues to go. And for the next 2 minutes, please put aside whatever your politics is. It doesn't mean a damn thing right now. Just follow these facts. 1973, approximately 1,600 confirmed American POWs were not returned to the U.S. Nixon and Kissinger wrote them off, as did every other president through George Herbert Walker Bush. Now, here's the part that's really going to blow you away. Senators John Kerry and John McCain, both Vietnam veterans, contributed to this despicable abandonment. You see, they were the 2 senators in charge of a Senate Select Committee on the POW and MIA affairs, which denied the POW's very existence. They let that happen. And then they ordered the destruction of all the evidence that had been accumulated for 20 years. Talk about anger. Second epilogue, 1975. I'm watching TV, and the North Vietnamese had launched an attack. And I'm watching all these places I had lived in fall to the enemy. And Vietnam fell. Oh, that's the POW slide, sorry. And it took 50 days. They conquered that whole country. My anger should be obvious. The results of my PTSD moments in Vietnam, which involved mistrusting figures of authority, now including presidents and senators years later. This political bullshit, as well as confusion, led to frustration, which fanned the flames of PTSD that I didn't even know I had. I'm going to read from my memoir. When I left Vietnam, I had accumulated 2,560 flight hours. 2,200 were combat hours. Each mission I flew, every close call, scare, and horror had changed me inside. I had fallen into a dark abyss where my emotions had been sealed and buried. To a large extent, I didn't understand my own emotions and didn't even realize a problem existed. Here's a profound perspective of what I just said, kinda. And a dear friend I flew with, another warrant officer, said this to me. When I got back from Vietnam, I was older than my friends. We were the same age, but I was older than them. Yeah. So here we go now. I'm a civilian and a veteran. Through the next 36 years, I earned my bachelor's degree at Youngstown State in education. But I wanted to fly one more time, so I flew in the Gulf of Mexico for 1 year. Mother Nature kept trying to kill me, so I quit and I began my teaching career. And during those years, my decision-making processes were heavily influenced by the effects of the war, both physical and mental. I didn't realize that. Everyday routines became complicated, horrific memories, a continued way of a military way of thinking, and thought processes that made things really clear to myself. Everyone, do what you're supposed to do. Everyone, follow the rules. I did. I knew if I didn't, I'd get fired. As a result, I was constantly at odds with administrators, parents, students, and even other teachers at times. And to make matters worse, there was a target on my back. I was president of my teachers union, and I was also the strike captain for 5 strikes. So everybody knew who they were messing with, so to speak. And this is what sums up my 30 years of teaching. Last day of my first year of teaching, I'm out there in the parking lot with the assistant principal. We're watching 2,000 kids leave the building. And I said, "Sir, it's been a rough year for me. Lots of disciplinary problems, but I was following board policy. Does everybody have this kind of trouble?" Here's what he said. "Joe, you have to look the other way." Now you know why the educational system is so screwed up. I wanted to hit that son of a bitch. Just like I wanted to hit that son of a bitch, Major Farsick, with the friendly fire thing. Okay, so confrontations with figures of authority. I'm still pretty good at that. Also, during my teaching years, the administration tried to fire me 5 times and failed 5 times. And in 1993, during one strike, my mom died. And I took it in stride. But for the longest time, it bothered me that I didn't cry at my mom's funeral. At the time, I didn't know one of my PTSD equations was emotional numbing. The answer would come years later. All right, let's move on to my physical problem for a moment. During those 5 decades after Vietnam, I underwent 4 lower back, 2 neck operations with titanium implants. I now have advancing nerve damage because of nerve damage back here. I still experience considerable pain and trouble maintaining balance, all because of my shoot down in 1970. But then, around 2014, I met my Veterans Administration orthotist who fashioned braces for me, similar to this one. I wear leg braces now that look like this. They enable me to walk and much, much more. Now, Amy, would you please introduce this fantastic orthotist that is now a very dear friend?
I sure will. So we have Joe's orthotist here. Her name is Therese Heron, and she is a certified prosthetist orthotist. And what she does is she takes the prescription from physicians. So for any of the students who are going to become physicians, you would give her a prescription, and she takes that prescription and she looks at the patient's gait, range of motion, looks at the medical needs, and some of them are very complex. And also she mostly looks at their lifestyle and what they need. And so Teresa is going to talk about what she did to accommodate Joe's needs.
There you go. Go get him, kid.
Thank you
Very nice.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Joe. Thank you so much for inviting me to this forum. It is my pleasure to service these veterans and heroes, as Joe is explaining his life to you. That's right. I met Joe about 2014. I'm at the Cleveland VA, Lewis Stokes Cleveland VA, up in Cleveland. He came in with an array of orthoses or braces. I'm going to just call them braces. And I evaluated what he was in. I had, as Amy was saying, a prescription to evaluate for AFOs, ankle foot orthoses. That is a very broad script. So when a patient or a veteran comes into me, a couple things I need to do right away. I need to develop a rapport. And with doctors, you need to develop a rapport with your patients right away. You have a very small amount of time to develop a trust. And as Joe's saying, he does not trust authority figures. In the VA, anybody that is a provider, a doctor, a physical therapist, an orthotist, prosthetist is an authority figure. So he's coming into this huge building, going down into a basement with no windows, getting put into a room and closing the door. And I'm going to say, I'm going to try to help you. He's seen people, probably 10 years before that. Yep. They've thrown on all sorts of different things. What do you think his idea is? What are you going to do with me now? I have stuff on. I have braces on. What's the first thing somebody needs to say as a provider to a patient? Any ideas? Pardon? Trust me. How can I help you? He is the driving force into what I do. I have to listen to what his goals are. I can read the reports of all the different providers that he's seen, the neuropsychologist, the neurologist, the physical medicine and rehab doctor, the physical therapist, the occupational therapist, the chiropractor, a whole array. I have to grab all that information as well as look at his x-rays to see where I can change things. A good example, and I love trees, but trees have all these different crooks to them. When you're building an orthosis, it's like you're trying to brace a tree with all those crooks to make that tree grow to its fullest. That's basically what an orthotist does. We deal with the limb in any deformity, any weakness, and try to bring it back to a functional goal. What's the difference between orthotics and prosthetics? I always say the orthotist has the most difficult job because I'm trying to straighten out a limb that's deformed. A prosthetist gets to rebuild the leg, the arm, using all sorts of different components and technology. A huge difference between the two. I was talking to Joe the other day about the difference between prosthetics and orthotics. We all know Dancing with the Stars. Have we ever seen a contestant that has braces on that show? No. Have we ever seen somebody that has a prosthesis on the show? That says enough right there. Having orthosis and trying to dance is much more difficult than having an artificial limb. So what we've done and what the field of orthotics has expanded to in the last 20 years is using different materials. I think Joe showed you a picture of an older brace that's plastic. It goes underneath the foot, comes around the back of the calf. It is making sure that the foot doesn't drop. So when people walk, your foot goes up, right? Also, when you walk, your hip goes up. So you're having a couple joints where you need to have that muscle firing. Joe has a back injury. His involvement is the whole lumbar region, where he's got structural issues as well as nerve issues. The nerve fires the muscle, the muscle moves the limb. Having it at the lumbar region, you are affected at the hip, you're affected at the thigh, the knee, the ankle. Nerves are funny. We cannot figure out a lot about nerve issues. What muscles is it going to affect? What muscles is it not going to affect? Can we get some response back from that nerve injury with certain muscles of the leg and hip? That is something that we have to figure out. And with Joe, it's been a continuum process from 2015 on. We are always changing, and we're always, because Joe's always changing. So going back to materials, I was able, with the leadership of the VA, to use cutting edge materials. We're using carbon fibers. We do a certain layup depending on his muscle strength that we look at in both plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, knee strength, because your ankle controls your knee, just like the hip bone's connected to the knee bone song that everybody loves. So designing and developing orthoses determine the strength you can exhibit on the dance floor. He came into my office with his dance instructor. And I love it when my patients bring in people, because she was very much an advocate for him. These veterans don't really speak up for themselves too much. And she basically said, he loves to dance. How can we make him dance? I love a challenge. I love a challenge, and I grabbed it. We tried so many different things. We've done a couple different carbon fiber AFOs. You have big hip things. We did a back brace. We did all sorts of stuff, which the Veterans Affairs does a great job in allowing us to try all these different orthoses to make him feel better, to make him function better. Because quality of life is really everybody's main goal in life. If you don't have a quality of life, you're looking for something. So we've tried a number of things, and it was so much fun. Every time that he had to come for a fitting, he'd bring Linda, because not only do I have to fit them, usually when I fit somebody with a brace, I have them walk down the hall, turn around, walk back. I look at their gait cycles, see if they're hitting all the milestones with gait. With Joe, he brings his dance instructor, and I have to make sure that he can do all his dance moves with his braces. So it's really kind of fun because we go out in the hallway in the basement, and they're dancing up and down my hallway every time that we fit braces. And it's a great, enlightening situation. What? Okay, I cried. I put a lot of emotion and passion into these veterans, and what they've done with their lives in making our lives free, I would do anything for them. At that point, are there any questions regarding his braces? I'd like to bring Joe back up to the stage. And thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you about this.
Is on? Reese is one special lady. And she once told me that because of the brace, or because of my condition, I gotta say this right, my dynamic balance is better than my static balance. Not only do I walk, she has enabled me to dance, which you will see soon. Okay, back to the PTSD thing. That went undetected until the year 2006, 33 years after I left Vietnam. In 2006, I hit rock bottom. I didn't care if I lived or died. I was not suicidal, though. Luckily, I came across a pamphlet, and it talked about soldiers with PTSD. And I reviewed that pamphlet, and it could have been written about me. So I went to a VA clinic, and the psychologist tested me and determined that I suffered from severe PTSD. So for the next 3 years, I participated in weekly 3-hour sessions, intensive group therapy, all Vietnam vets, and once a week, an hour session with a psychologist. Talk therapy was very helpful for me to understand PTSD and what it had done to me. And hearing things like this was most helpful. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are wounded and in need of healing. Also, during counseling, I learned what my factors of my PTSD equation were, and we've been going through them. A lot of unexpected noises: survivor's guilt, emotional numbing, anger, mistrusting. You've heard plenty about those items. Before addressing more factors, though, there's one more thought about emotion that I learned, and it's a beautiful and powerful analogy. Figuratively speaking, I was told that I had built a wall around my heart, a wall of bricks. Nothing came in, nothing went out. I had effectively shut down emotions. This was the beginning of a process where removing these bricks led to healing. Little by little, understanding, little by little, removed a brick. I began to release energy, stuff that had been held in there for 40 years. I now knew why I didn't cry at Mom's funeral. And I also accept the fact that it's okay to cry. And if you want to see me cry, play taps. Automatic. There are 2 more triggers, and these are the big ones: hypersensitivity to injustice and traumatic related guilt. Throughout my post-war years, I've easily upset by insensitivity to injustice concerning other people and their wrongful behavior, their incompetence and ramifications, their arrogance, ignorance, and their narcissism. Ooh. Remember the principal saying, "Look the other way, Joe"? I rest my case. He had a smug look on his face too. Honest to God. All of these are examples of hypersensitivity, and they go hand in hand with mistrusting figures of authority. Now, what I'm about to tell you is the main reason why I mistrust authority and why I'm hypersensitive to injustice. This is a little girl I named Dao Tran. This story is not about her. She represents the little girl that you're about to hear in this story. And before I jump into it, I have to talk about flare fuses, flares. Sometimes we would run flare missions at nighttime, and they're those big things this pointer doesn't show you. That bucket's filled with flare fuses, 4 feet long, 6 inches diameter, and at the tip of it, there's a 6-inch hard plastic flare fuse, and you can unscrew it, okay? It was early in the morning, and we were on call all night for a flare mission. We didn't have to fly. So we're going home, and we're flying low level. And before we took off, the aircraft commander said, "Hey, Joey, you want to sit in the left seat?" Oh, yes. You want to fly the left seat of a Huey. There's nothing like it in the world. But you got to be an aircraft commander, and I'm just a co-pilot now. So I jumped on that chance, and we're bebopping down this road, 120 knots, low level. Along the road, Vietnamese civilians are riding their little motorcycles and bicycles, and some of them are on the backs of flatbed trucks. And I glanced at the aircraft commander, and he's like this, watching something that's going on behind me. So I took a quick look, and the gunner is throwing these flare fuses, which he had unscrewed, at the Vietnamese people. I pulled away from the road so he couldn't hit anybody. And the AC says, "Get back to the road." I moved further away. And he said, "I got it." And he takes the controls and he puts the bird back on the road, and the crew chief's throwing these fuses. We get back to the base, and a few hours later, I hear the aircraft commander and my platoon captain arguing right outside my hooch. And then the aircraft commander comes and talks to me. He says, "Hey, a little girl was killed along that road today. She got hit in the head with a flare fuse. And we're going to be investigated by the Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division." That's like a detective branch of a police department. And the aircraft commander, I can still see this, "You don't say a damn thing." I said, "You go to hell." I'm telling them exactly what happened. So there was some yelling and cursing and some intimidation then. And so I spoke to the captain. I was looking for advice. I'm just a snotty-nosed 20-year-old kid. And he said, "You're entitled to a lawyer, of course, but not much more." And then as the conversation ended, he said, "Oh, by the way, you're grounded until further notice." Holy shit, I'm thinking. I'm going to be court-martialed, convicted of murder, and spend decades at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where the Army's prison is. The next day, I met with the CID investigator. I told him everything that happened. And I went back to the company area. And I was stunned to hear that, "Joey, you're back on flight status." Right. The aircraft commander is back on flight status. The gunner was grounded and fined $100. And the case went away. This little girl was killed, not related to combat. She was killed, and the case went away because the powers that be made it happen. For nearly 4 decades, this beat me up. Why didn't I take the controls and just climb up to altitude? Why didn't I tell the aircraft commander go to hell. We're doing this. PTSD doesn't make you weak, it makes you a survivor. You learn that after the fact, which is good. And some well-meaning people will tell you, just put it behind you or forget about it, life goes on. It's not that easy. Learning about PTSD and my own psychological equation was just the beginning. I had to learn about shades of gray versus a black and white thought process. I had to let go of my foxhole mentality. And I also learned that PTSD never goes away and is never cured. I also learned about these other factors, demon dreams, intrusive memories, depression, hyperarousal, trauma reminders. I'm not going to elaborate on all of those, but please know that I still have demon dreams and hyperarousal still bothers me. So, how was my life transformed? In 2009, my psychologist challenged my group. They said, do something that's going to improve the quality of your life. Well, I chose writing and ballroom dancing. I began ballroom dancing when I was 59, and 15 minutes into my first lesson, I was hooked. Wonderful things were happening. I lost 30 pounds. I danced regularly 4 or 5 times a week. I was socializing. And the lady responsible for that is Linda Almond. Please stand, Linda, and wave. This is the girl. She insisted on visiting Therese at the VA. There I am sitting in my underwear, and these 2 girls are talking about my braces and stuff. Okay. And during this time, I was so inspired that I wrote 5 books about ballroom dancing. Word dances 1 through 5. They're all set up here. And I was overwhelmed by the joy and the experiencing, and I wanted to convey those feelings to others. I also wrote 2 historical novels that I won't get into. I had improved the quality of my life, and then the most fantastic thing happened in the world. I met my lovely Linda on the ballroom floor, and I proposed to Linda on the ballroom floor, and 3.5 years ago, we got married. That's a picture of our wedding dance. It's a bolero, the dance of passion. And the one on the right, that's the last dance of the night. Look at my beautiful bride face there. Oh, that's my favorite picture. Come on. That's us doing a tango. That's really us doing a tango on the left there. All right. Please take this message with you when you leave to your friends or somebody you suspect might need help. Let them know PTSD can't be cured, but a person can learn to live with it. Help is available. Take command. Improve the quality of your life. And for the record, I still take counseling on an as-needed basis. And in spite of my progress, some things still bother me, like demon dreams. I am proud to have flown the iconic image of the Vietnam War. And I hope you have learned a little bit about PTSD and that it can be helped with, it can be dealt with. And this is my favorite quote on PTSD. When you can tell your story and it doesn't make you cry, you know you have healed. I know I haven't healed yet. And sometimes this presentation gets to me, other times it doesn't. Now, before I take any questions, I'd like to show you just how effective my braces are. I'd like to invite my beautiful bride, Linda, to the dance floor, and we're going to demonstrate a rumba and an East Coast swing. And check out my dynamic balance. Welcome my bride, please. This is a rumba. Oh, I have to turn this off.
Yes.
Okay. Hey. Please feel free to check out my book display, grab any flyers that you like. The books are for sale at very nice savings. They are all signed. Are there any questions before break time? Medical students, anything? Okay. Oh, I forgot to mention this. No, that'll be for later. Okay. It's break time. Amy.
5 minutes.
5 minutes?
5-minute break. So come back in 5 minutes and Joe is going to continue his story. Restrooms are just to your right.
I can go? Okay. All righty. Welcome back, everybody. Here we are, segment 2 from battlefields to ballrooms. And we're going to begin with some inspiration. Daedalus and Icarus, first ever to fly. Daedalus told his foolhardy son, don't fly too close to the sun. Your wax will melt and you'll crash and burn. Icarus didn't. Listen to him, and you can see he paid the consequences. Leonardo da Vinci, inventor, scientist, artist from Tuscan and Florence, Italy, and he envisioned a flying machine, which he called the aerial screw. Igor Sikorsky. This man is credited with producing the first practical helicopter. So that's the foundation for inspiration. I wanted to fly. And herein lies the premises for both enlisting in the Army and its subsequent physical and mental problems that you are already very aware of. Once again, the good, bad, and the questionable, no enhancements, no exaggerations. From an early age, I wanted to fly. My favorite Disney movie and book, Peter Pan. I can remember vivid dreams of soaring around the neighborhood without any devices whatsoever. I also read many books on the military way of living. And I, of course, was inspired by my family. This is Joe Sepesey. Joe is Slovak for grandfather. He emigrated in 1906 from Czechoslovakia and served in World War I as a bugler. Dad's on the right, Uncle Frank's on the left. He and one other brother served World War II. Dad was on Guadalcanal. Uncle Frank was on the USS Franklin, the ship that would not die and survived. And I grew up when the fledgling NASA was launching projects Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts. So I wanted to fly. I visited the Army at the age of 15. I went to see the Air Force, Marine Corps, and Navy recruiters. And they told me, you want to be an officer, you need a college degree. And I knew I was not college material. But the Army said, hey, you graduate from high school, pass a medical, pass a written, you're in. Where do I sign? Let's do this. So, did I hit too many there? Oh, okay, that's good. So I enlisted, and let's see, where am I? Okay, after completing basic training in the spring of 1969, when I enlisted, I was guaranteed a warrant officer flight training slot. Guaranteed. So that's me in basic training. And then on my birthday, May 24th, 1969, I report to Warrant Officer Flight School at Fort Walters, Texas. And the first 4 weeks, I'm now called a WOC, Warrant Officer Candidate. During the first 4 weeks, we experienced something called pre-flight. And during those 4 weeks, a candidate's determination was put to the test. You see, we were under the command of veteran Vietnam vet helicopter pilots who were known as tactical officers, or TACs for short. And it was their job to convince or encourage candidates to quit flight school. They wanted to weed them out. And they made that very important from the moment we arrived. They started literally banging on the bus, the windows, and then we filed out and they're screaming at us. And at one point, 2 candidates, would-be candidates, quit on the spot. And I can remember 3 TACs screaming at me, 1 in each ear and 1 2 inches from my face. But I understood the mental game, and I didn't let harassment bother me one bit. I understood that what the TACs were throwing at us paralleled the pressures of learning to fly, and then later in combat. So it made sense to me. After pre-flight, actual flight happened. And this is my aircraft, an OH-23. This is my trainer. I learned how to fly helicopters in this bird, and that was the unit patch for flight school. From day one, I had trouble controlling the aircraft, especially learning how to hover, which was incredibly difficult. I was guilty of over-controlling or wiping out the cockpit. When you're flying, you just nudge. I'm doing all this. And of course, the bird's going all over the place. But, well, I was bad. I almost washed out twice. But my instructor pilot, Bobby Cowan, had faith in me. And after flying 12 hours, it was approaching decision time for him. Should candidate Sepesey be washed out, pushed back 2 weeks, or allowed to solo? I will read to you from the memoir. After a few practice approaches, Mr. Cowan took the controls and hovered to the side of the field. I thought something bad's going to happen. I'll never forget that. Something bad was about to happen. Mr. Cowan put the helicopter at the ground and said, "You have it." I take the controls and I watched Mr. Cowan unbuckle and slip out of the helicopter. He leaned inside and keyed his mic. "Do you think you can take this thing around the traffic pattern 3 times without killing yourself?" Not waiting for me to respond, he added, "It's getting too damn dangerous for me. I'm getting out." I fumbled for an answer, but Mr. Cowan didn't wait for an answer. He unplugged his helmet, turned around, and sauntered away, leaving me alone in my flying machine. It was time to solo. Holy shit, I thought. I was going to solo in a 23 all by myself. I flew 3 traffic patterns without killing myself. Mr. Cowan congratulated me, and I experienced such a sublime sense of relief and accomplishment. My flying did improve. I passed my final check ride, and then along with 60 other candidates, we left Fort Walters and proceeded to Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia, Fort Stewart. And the first phase of secondary flight training involved instrument flying, and that was done in this OH-13 helicopter. You know, this thing is been flying for like 90 years. It's a great bird. Instrument flying was very, very difficult. And you see, you flew with a hood on. You had no reference peripherally or forward. You are literally looking at the instrument panel. Extremely difficult. And once again, I started wiping out the cockpit. I encountered difficulty and I almost washed out 3 times, but I hung in there. And with the help and intervention of my instructor, I passed my instrument check ride. And we went on to a UE transition. And this is the good old UH-1, the UE. UH stands for utility helicopter, which means it can do any number of any variety of missions. And learning to fly the UE was the least stressful. And I stopped wiping out the cockpit, and I developed a lighter control touch, and I passed my final check ride. And in February of 1970, I earned my Warrant Officer 1 bar and the insignia, but more so, I earned the silver wings of an Army aviator. Again, what a sense of relief and a personal victory this was for me. And I owed it all to 3 fine instructors that had confidence in me. And as life would have it, a new set of challenges awaited. This is a quick geography lesson. On the left, you see Southeast Asia and the Indochina Peninsula. I'm not going to use the pointer because you can't see the red dot. You have North Vietnam in the buff color, or the almost white, DMZ, South Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, South China Sea. On the right, if you focus on South Vietnam, it's divided into 4 sections or military corps groups. I Corps, very mountainous. 2 Corps, mountainous Central Highlands. I flew in 2 Corps my 2nd and 3rd tours, and then 3 Corps, that's where I was my first tour, and then down in the Delta. I never got down to the Delta. So let me tell you about my first tour of duty. Well, during flight school, I overheard the instructors talking, and they said, if you really want to learn how to fly, get in the 1st Cavalry Division. And I also heard them say that the 1st Cav led the way when it came sustaining casualties. That's the 1st Cav shoulder patch on the left. March 30th, 1970, some flight school buddies and I landed in Vietnam, and during in-processing, I volunteered for the Cav, along with another handful of guys. And we did receive orders for the Cav, and then we were assigned to the 227th Assault Helicopter Battalion. The battalion commander assigned 2 of my buddies and me to the Bravo Good Deal, and I'll get to that in a minute. But if you look at the red arrow, you see Saigon, and the red arrow is dead center. That's where Phuc then was, and I lived there for a year. And I'm assigned to Bravo Company right there. That was our company patch. You put it on your pocket right here. And that's a John Wayne picture, me next to the sign there. I lived in a hooch. It was partitioned off for eight warrant officers. Now, if you walk out that door and turn to the right, you look up this dirt street, and the building we just left is on the right, and the arrow in the center is pointing to where the Bravo 227 Hueys were parked, and that is that's 048. Remember that number, please, 048. And that arrow is pointing to the cargo deck because there's a lot that goes on in the cargo deck, as you have already heard me mention a couple of times. The primary mission of Bravo 227 was to support the infantry troops of the 1st Cav. They were known as Sky Troopers. We also supported elements of Army of Republic Vietnam. Our nickname was the Bravo Good Deal, and our call sign was Masher. We had 20 birds like this, and this is the cargo deck. We never flew with the doors closed. They were pinned shut, and that door that you see on the far right was stowed in the back. The seats were always in the up position, and the jump seats, if you can see them there, were also stowed. Unless you were flying a specific mission, you didn't want to be bothered with any of those seats. Four-man crew. The aircraft commander sat in the left seat here. The Charlie Pops, or co-pilot, sat in the right seat. That's the instrument panel, the console, and then there was another overhead console filled with circuit breakers and all kinds of other switches and stuff. We sat in armored seats, 1/2-inch thick steel. The arrow is pointing to the chicken plate, the sliding chicken plate. And over there where it says Joey, that chicken plate slid back and forth to give you another foot of protection. Other than that, you were wide open, coming straight at you. Your whole body's open. Your head, your neck are wide open. Your legs are open to enemy fire. But we appreciate it. And you tried to make yourself as small as you could when you flew. Stay behind that armor. These are just a couple birds from my unit. And okay, flight school flying and combat flying were completely different. We learned how to fly in combat from the existing aircraft commanders in the unit and the crewmen. And this is where I really developed a nice light control touch. To be an effective combat pilot, you had to minimize the risks and still accomplish your mission. Flying in a war zone was complicated because there was so much going on in a pilot's brain. Check this out. Regular flying, your left hand is on this control, the collective pitch. Your right hand is on this control, the cyclic. Your feet are working the pedals. Maybe you're working the throttle. Your fingers are doing a ballet on switches, knobs, and stuff. Your feet are on, and your head is always on a swivel, both inside the cockpit and all around you. Now, throw in combat. Your eyes are cross-checking the instruments and the caution lights. Eyes are on other aircraft in your formation. You're also surveying the way you're going to land. And then before you even land, you're checking out the way you're going to leave. Your ears, you are listening to 3 different radios and the intercom system. You're also listening to the sounds of the helicopter. Everything sounds smooth, or maybe there's a knocking you don't like. You're also feeling the aircraft's vibrations, and you are totally aware and responding to the personnel inside your aircraft, including the passengers, and somebody that might be shooting at you. I'd like to tell you briefly now about fire support bases. Infantry battalions operated from these bases. This picture was taken from about 1,500 feet. And I apologize for the quality, but the little white specks you see in the middle of that, those are tents or bunkers or fighting positions, that kind of thing. These fire bases were Spartan duty stations, homes for infantry battalions, artillery batteries, and their support units. This is another picture of a fire base David in Cambodia. Again, you can see the fighting positions, tents, and bunkers. If you think about America in the plains in the 1850s to 1880s, you know, you had Fort Apache, and that you operated from Fort Apache. In Vietnam, the infantry operated from their fire base, and the operational concept was the same. If you walk into a fire support base, this is what it looks like. And if you turn to the left, on the other side of the barbed wire, you see where the helicopters would stage, getting ready for whatever mission they had to do for that day. Now, I'd like to tell you about the kill zone. From ground level to 1,500 feet is the kill zone. If you are there, you are in the range of effective small arms fire, which means you can die from an AK-47 or a light machine gun. Above 1,500 feet, you're usually safe. So when we were flying through the kill zone, we climbed or descended as fast as we could. But there were times when the enemy still shot at you and hit you. And Winston Churchill said it best. Nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result. I can attest to that, as well as being shot at with results. You will recall my shoot down, and then they had to sling load the bird back to Phuc Vinh. You will recall the 51 caliber incident where the 60 bullets went in the left and out the right. And you will recall me tangling with a 37 millimeter anti-aircraft cannon. Let me tell you about another close call that challenges survivability. It too involves 51 caliber fire. And this time, one round hit my bird. The one round went in the left cowling. That's my seat would have been just forward of that. Now, if you take that piece of cowling and move it forward, you can see the exit hole over there. That's one 51 caliber bullet hole. It missed the tail rotor drive shaft by 1/16 of an inch. And when we got hit, we were low and slow. So if that drive shaft had been hit, it would have been severed. We definitely would have crashed and burned. Excuse me. Oh, here we go. So I must remind you again, here we are with PTSD and survivor's guilt. There. Okay. After that mission, I received some good news because the aircraft, I was flying with the senior aircraft commander. He said, Joey, you done good. You are now your own aircraft commander. What is your call sign? I said, I want to be Masher 24. So I picked, that was my number. I was Masher 24 from that moment on. And that was cool. But now it was my turn to train the other new guys coming in, the Charlie Pops, the co-pilots. I had to teach them just like I had been taught. And I was going to teach them about the 5 missions in the Bravo Good Deal. Command and control, logistics, combat, general support, and medevac. Let's begin with command and control missions, also known as Chuck Chuck or Charlie Charlie. Basically, you flew an infantry battalion commander around his area of operation. He was checking out his plan for maneuvers, maybe observing a combat assault or adjusting artillery. And what better platform than from a Huey? I always flew higher. I was probably at 2,000 feet, circling around doing whatever he wanted to do. Log missions or logistics missions, carrying supplies. These tested the pilot's skill with every takeoff and landing. You can see this picture again, how the sea rations are being loaded onto the Huey. And here are a couple other pictures, loading hot meals and water, mail and ammunition, back and forth all day, in and out of the jungle. The Huey could handle internally 1,200 to 1,500 pounds or 6 American infantrymen. And you as an aircraft commander got pretty good at estimating the weight. And we developed calibrated eyeballs. And this is medical students, this is a known medical fact. You look it up, calibrated eyeballs in your medical books, and it will say aircraft commanders, Huey, Vietnam. Trust me on that, okay? And that's my joke of the day. It's a medical marvel. After loading, we would land to an LZ in the middle of the jungle. Many of them were as big as football fields, but many of them also only held one Huey at a time. And some you couldn't land. You landed to the tops of the trees and then worked your way down. Those were called hover downs. They were literally a hole in double or triple canopy jungle. Some were as deep as 150 feet. And when you got to the bottom, sometimes you couldn't land because of stumps or very uneven terrain. Now, let's hold that thought for a minute, and we're going to interrupt myself. This is a three-way view of a helicopter, Huey, UH-1. I want you to pay attention to two numbers. Its overall length is 58 feet. Its overall width is 48 feet. And I'm not exaggerating here. Sometimes we would have to land to a hover down that was 60 feet by 50 feet. You did so by constantly chattering on the intercom with your crew chief gunner and co-pilot. And you worked your way down little by little until you could unload whatever you were carrying. And of course, if you had a mechanical problem or somebody was shooting at you during this, things got more interesting. One time in a hover down, I had a hydraulics failure. Oh God. That's like losing your power steering, only 100 times worse. Thank God I only had another like 20 feet to go. During log missions, much of the time, we were flying low level or nap of the earth, in between trees, in between little valleys and stuff. And I got to tell you how exciting that was. There I was, a 19-year-old kid, and I didn't know a damn thing about life. I was indestructible and going to live forever. And I'm cruising at 120 knots, that's 145 miles per hour, in a $250,000 machine that had real machine guns and real bullets. Hot damn, it doesn't get any better. Not for a 20-year-old kid that doesn't know much about life. That was low-level flight. We also flew what were called high overhead approaches. If we got right over the LZ and we corkscrewed down, and at the very bottom, you just hung that bird over on the left and you dissipated 120 knots like that. And you could get into that LZ and out, hopefully in 10 seconds, depending on the obstacles. Those tactics were used with combat assaults also. Now, during my 3 tours, I probably took part in 120 combat assaults, both insertions and extractions. Combat assaults were violent movements of troops from point A to point B, insertions or extractions. The infantry soldiers were loaded up in the preparatory zone and then took off going to their landing zone. Now, while we're in the sky going to the landing zone, the artillery is prepping the landing zone with 105s and 155 howitzers, blowing the hell out of it. We wanted to be about a minute out when we saw this. A Willie Pete, white phosphorus round in the or near the LZ. That marked the end of the bombardment, that your own artillery was not going to blow you out of the sky now. It was okay to land. So as we turn on to final approach, our Cobra gunships roll in with minigun fire, rocket fire, and grenades. At the same time, our door, there we are on short final, and our door gunners open up, blasting anything and everything in the LZ in the tree line. The troops jump off. Sometimes they didn't even wait till you landed. They thought we were crazy. We thought they were crazy. They wanted to get the hell away from that helicopter. They were sitting ducks. And then as we depart, the Cobras roll in again, as do the door gunners shooting up the departure path. Sometimes an emergency extraction was needed. Now, this is an illustration, it's a print, an actual print of a Huey and a long-range recon patrol, those 5 guys. Now, this picture, I swear, depicts something I actually lived, so I had to buy this print. This recon patrol, I dropped them in Cambodia on Monday. Their job was to observe enemy activity and not be detected. The next day, luckily for them, I'm working in the same area of operation and I'm on the same frequency. Masher 2-4, recon. Go ahead. Where are you? I'm near your location, blah, blah, blah. Just come get us now. Come get us down. Same LZ. They were being assaulted by an NVA company of 150 men. So I didn't even have time to get Cobra gunships. I just said, okay, we're coming in. We landed as fast as we could. They hustled to the helicopter, shooting as they're jumping on board. Our door gunners are opening up, and we got the hell out of there. Another minute, literally, and this is what the lieutenant told me. It's another minute, they would have been dead or captured. That's how tight, that's how lucky they were. If I had not been in that area, a lot of things in their favor on that day. General support missions, taxi mission, flying point A to point B, a sniffer mission. Remember where I took the 51 cal through the Cali? We had a machine in the back of the helicopter and an intelligence officer sitting there. Attached to the machine were big long tubes, like with a vacuum cleaner. As we're rolling along, air is being pushed through the tubes and being analyzed by the machine to detect a human presence. That they were trying to discover where VC or NVA troops were amassing. And because we were low and slow, that's how we got shot that one day. We also flew spray missions, most of the time for mosquito control or defoliation. And yes, I actually flew a defoliation mission once, and that tank was filled with Agent Orange. I killed a jungle that day. Guilty, I killed a jungle. And we also flew flare missions, which you heard about when I told you about Dow Tran. Medevac missions. I always get this question. Did you ever pull a medevac, Joe? And my answer is yes, many. And please know that there were designated medevac units, and they had the Red Crosses But the Red Crosses didn't mean anything to the enemy. They shot at their jobs when evacuating the wounded. They didn't care. It didn't matter what your primary mission was for the day. If there was a medevac, you went. Weather was a factor when running these missions. This picture, we are obviously flying in the kill zone. We're probably 50 feet above the trees, trying to avoid that scud layer of clouds. But we were supporting grunts that day, American infantrymen. You did what you had to do to help those guys out. So there we are, bebopping around in the kill zone. Let's change the topic here for a moment. We'll call this youth. That's me right after I made aircraft commander. There I am sitting in the left seat, and the red arrow is pointing to my ballistic ceramics vest, better known as a chicken plate. It could stop an AK-47 round. Top right-hand corner, that's the actual ceramic thing, and then it's put in that sleeve with Velcro and stuff, and then you put it on just like a vest. I wore that thing every hour of every mission I flew in Vietnam, even if I was at 5,000 feet going from point A to point B. I did not take any chances. Now, here's a cool picture. I flew with these guys frequently. The guy on the left is my door gunner. That's me in the middle, and Ronnie is my crew chief on the right. And when I show this picture to people, something hits them, and the women usually pick up on it immediately. And that is what? Just yell it out. Come on. Youth. Animal looks like, we call him Animal because he looked like he was 12 years old. So we wanted to give him a badass nickname. He looks like he's 12 years old. I just turned 20, and Ronnie is 21. That was youth. Now, there were lighter moments. Sometimes I flew more interesting and unique missions. And here's one incident I'm going to tell you about. It was called a brief flight. Remember that, a brief flight. I was not flying this day. I was in my hooch in my bunk, relaxing. Crack, crack, crack. 122s were falling on the Bravo Good Deal revetments and our refueling point. I sat up, pulled on my boots, tied them real quick, grabbed my helmet, and I'm running to the red arrow in the middle, into that. I jumped in the first bird that was there. We cranked up, and I took off. I will read from the memoir. As I climbed through 500 feet, I headed away from Phuc Vinh and the other helicopters that were leaping into the sky. I climbed to about 3,000 feet and circled a couple of miles to the west. Black smoke continued to pour from the fuel dump as fast-reacting soldiers were closing valves and manning large fire extinguishers. Another handful of minutes passed and things calmed further. No more explosions, so normal traffic flight patterns resumed in Phuc Vinh. It was then that I noticed how unusually cool and breezy it was in the cockpit. Then I noticed my attire: flight helmet, boots, and boxer shorts. Nothing else. True story. And that's why it's called a brief flight. But the story has an epilogue. See the red and blue arrows? Those are revetments. They're like bunkers for helicopters. But the blue arrow is something different here. We just landed. After securing the bird, another crew chief from 2 revetments away called us over. As we approached the revetment, he pointed to a dud 122 millimeter rocket that had pierced the top and the side of his revetment. That's represented by the blue arrow. Within an hour, an explosive expert removed the dud rocket. I don't know what was more extraordinary, the dud rocket wedging itself in a Good Deal revetment or me flying in my underwear. And the epilogue continues now. 5 months ago, at the end of my first full day in Vietnam, I experienced my first rocket attack. Crawling to a pitch black bunker with the other new guys, terrified, we huddled in the darkness, wondering what the hell was going on and not knowing what to expect. This time, with the very first crack, I knew exactly what the hell was going on. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to run to the flight line, knowing I had to get one Huey in the sky. I recall not giving the falling rockets and the burning fuel point any thoughts. Very vivid. I suspect I felt that way because everything was happening in front of me. Oddly enough, I found that comforting to a degree. I'm sure adrenaline also had something to do with my actions. After the attack and landing, I strolled back to in my most curious attire, to my cubicle and resumed relaxing. Such was Vietnam, such was war. Back to PTSD, which factor? Emotional numbing. My second tour of Vietnam, well, at the end of my first tour, I had accumulated 1,100 combat flight hours. Just like those IPs had talked about, we racked up the hours. I had a 30-day free leave. I came home and then I went back and I rejoined the Bravo Good Deal, but this time we were up there in 2 Corps, the Central Highlands, and we became attached to the 1st Aviation Brigade. Now, I have a story of interest for you about 2 Corps. This is the Mang Yang Pass. June 1954, 1,500 French soldiers were slaughtered by the NVA on a big battle. If you have seen the movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, that opening scene depicts very briefly that battle. Those soldiers, that's another shot of the hilltop, were buried standing up, facing the west. They were buried standing up because they would never rest, and they were facing their homeland, France, knowing they would never get back there. That's the way it was. Second tour missions. Upon my return, the commanding officer made me Yellow 1, which was the company's flight lead. If there was ever a flight of 6, 8, 10 birds, I was the Yellow 1, and then everybody behind me was Yellow 2, Yellow 3, Yellow 4, Yellow 5, blah, 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 blah. So now it was my job to run good deal flights, and my co-pilot was always a commissioned officer, usually a captain. Not only was I training him to be an aircraft commander, but also, and legitimately so, a Yellow 1 in his own right. At the end of the second tour, I went stateside for 10 months. I served 4 months with the 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg, and then the 5th Special Forces Flight Detachment, also at Fort Bragg. I disliked stateside duty immensely. I actually missed flying in Vietnam. I called the Pentagon. You can do that. I said, send me back to Vietnam, please. They said, okay. So I go back to my third tour of duty, and I'm back in 2 Corps in the Central Highlands. Now, compared to my first and second tours, my third tour was not that exciting. But I was in a same AO, I was an AC, and I was flying UEs again. I did have a series of negative and stressful experiences with a certain captain, and I will call him Captain Botch. And this story, which I will read from the memoir, involves dirty ammunition. You are also going to meet a fellow by the name of Sergeant Reckel. About a week ago, I had trouble with a gunner. He only had 100 rounds of M60 ammo in his ammo cam. I tracked down the flight sergeant. I'll call him Sergeant Reckel. He was in his little shack bullshitting with someone instead of patrolling the flight line. So I told Sergeant Reckel that I needed ammo and a gunner who knew what to do with it. A few minutes later, the same gunner returned to the bird with ammo. Okay, no problem, I thought. That gunner probably won't pull that kind of shit again. This morning, I was pre-flighting my aircraft. The gunner was nowhere to be found. I began to worry about making my departure time, and it annoyed me that I might be late because of a missing gunner. I looked in his ammo can, and then I just lost it. There were only about 300 rounds of M60 ammo there, rusty and slimed over with some sort of oil. I scooped up the ammo in my arms and stormed to Sergeant Reckel's shack. There he was, feet propped up, bullshitting with some other NCO, instead of being on the flight line, instead of knowing my gunner was late, instead of raising hell because of the worthless ammo. I stopped in front of his desk and dropped the worthless ammo on top of it. I want a gunner now, and I want a gunner that knows what to do with this. Sergeant Reckel hem-hawed something I can't remember. That's an order, Sergeant. I was pissed. I turned and I left his little hideaway. I had never said anything like that to an NCO or enlisted man before. Never. Within 10 minutes, a gunner appeared on the scene. Sergeant Reckel had the ammo brought to the bird, crew chief broken it open, and we took off, making our deadline. That evening, Captain Botch came into the bunker club. Mr. Sepesey, step outside. I'd like a word with you. It got really quiet in the club, and I felt all the eyes on me as I walked out. Botch stood in front of me and said, Mr. Sepesey, Sergeant Reckel told me about this morning's incident. I hope you jacked Reckel's shit up. Botch assumed his usual askance and insignificant stare, and then surprised the hell out of me. Not at all. It's your behavior that's the problem. My behavior? Sergeant Reckel was considerably older than you. You shouldn't have spoken with disrespect to him. He's a jerk, a lazy, incompetent jerk. Now, that's just what I mean. You were entirely wrong. I don't believe I'm hearing this. Reckel screwed up, and I let him know it. He was irresponsible. What's age got to do with this? Did he tell you that this was the second time this kind of bullshit happened? I doubt it. Botch raised his hands to woe me. Now, Mr. Sepesey, he's been in the Army a long time, much longer than you. You can't talk to an NCO that way. If he would get his shit together, he wouldn't have to deal with me. I expect a crew at my bird every morning with clean ammo and guns and on time. Mr. Sepesey, this is my message. I don't want you treating Sergeant Reckel disrespectfully again. I was dumbfounded. My give a shit meter was on 0. I raised my hands and shook my head and walked away. My give a shit meter on 0. PTSD, which one? Mistrusting and confrontation with figures of authority. All right, let's go now. February 73, the war is ended. I'm out of the Army. I land in Oakland, California. I'm separated from the Army. During out processing, I am assigned to N Troop of the 107th Armored Cavalry Division in Akron, Ohio. And on February 17th, 1973, I arrive in Youngstown, sneak in the back door, surprising my mom on her birthday. Nobody knew I was coming home. I can still feel her hugging me and just crying, and it was so cool. So here I am. My second war begins. Now, because I've had to do this in 2 segments, I just want to clarify. I'm out of the Army, living with PTSD, and you already know what the factors of my PTSD equation are. This is a challenge coin I carry around with me. Everywhere I go, it's in my pants pocket. It reminds me that my wound is invisible. It reminds me of where I've been and what I've gone through. There were some good times, though. Warren Motts and his daughter Lori welcomed me to Motts Military Museum in Groveport near Columbus. He had an aircraft there, 048. That number ring a bell? There's 048 in the Bravo Good Deal 40 years before. I flew that bird, and there it is sitting in Groveport, Ohio. Holy smokes. Warren sponsored me for the induction into the Ohio Military Hall of Fame for Valor. I went to a mini reunion of helicopter pilots, and I met General Hal Moore and Joe Galloway, the journalist, again from that movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. I was invited to as a guest speaker on Y103, classic rock station, Youngstown, Ohio, 5 times. And last March, I actually flew a Huey again in the left seat. 20-minute ride, a little rusty, but I hovered pretty good and got the bird up and down. But the coolest thing about this flight was, look who was sitting behind me in the jump seat, my bride, Linda. How about that one? The flip side of my challenge coin always reminds me of how much my life has improved because of the wonderful things that dancing brought to my life. It brought balance. I was still in need of help, had to continue with counseling. And again, I have to repeat, the key to dealing with PTSD is improving the quality of your life. You have already heard about ballroom dancing and writing, the 2 endeavors that turned my life around. I hope this presentation has enlightened and entertained you and given you pause for thought. It is an encapsulation of my memoir, Once We Flew. I like to think I've come a long way from the time that these pictures were taken and today. Before I take questions and answers, would you please again welcome my beautiful bride to the dance floor? Another demonstration, nightclub 2-step, and a really nasty West Coast swing. Lindita. Oh, camera's off. It's from a commercial. Who company?
DoorDash.
DoorDash. It's actually a song from 1966. Herb Alpert did. It's called There we go. Okay. Are there any questions? Yes, sir. Oh, yeah, we have a microphone coming. Oh, fire away.
I know you served for 4 years. Did you originally enlist for 4 years?
Yes, if you wanted to for warrant officer flight training, it was a 4-year sign up. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Was there a 4-year commitment? And the answer is yes. I served actually 2 weeks under 4 weeks, 4 years.
Okay. Okay. And I noticed on your dress blues.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the enlisted men's dress blues, and they have like a gold, bead around the lapel. Now you're an officer, so now is the officers different than
Yes,
the
sir.
enlisted men?
The question involves the dress blue uniform. Being an officer, this is the code I wore. The enlisted men had different appointments, such as epaulets with the braiding, that kind of thing. And I think they had a different yellow stripe here.
I know it's the same thing with the Marine Corps. The enlisted men jacket has that red lining, but the officers do not.
Yeah.
And also the officers, which I didn't know, that and I'm not sure about your particular uniform, if a different shade of blue than with the enlisted men, but the Marine Corps officer is black. Mm-hmm. And then the jacket on a enlisted man is like a dark blue.
Relevant to the colors, I think they're identical in the Army.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I forgot the third one.
Oh, okay. Yes, there in the back. Yeah, right there.
This is a dance question about your braces. When you first got the first pair of braces for dancing, how has it developed over the years to what you wear today?
Oh, okay.
The leg braces. She was asking about the leg braces and how they've progressed from the first time you first began.
If you remember the picture, the first ones were plastic, and now this is what I'm wearing. These are carbon fiber, and they're Velcroed, and the padding has been improved along the shin, and there's actually more flexibility than the original ones, although they restrict me unbelievably. We had to stop doing a couple dances. Linda and I deemed them unsafe. We don't quick step or Viennese waltz, and there are certain steps or sequences that are dangerous to me, so we just don't do them. Well, anybody else? Don.
Yeah, just if you know somebody that has PTSD or probably does and could benefit, what I don't know how to encourage someone very close to me that he needs help.
You're commenting on how to approach somebody.
Exactly.
There's never an easy way, has been my experience. If somebody, though, opens up, like at every seminar I've given, somebody's come up and shared something. That's my opening. And I hit the highlights. You can get help. Go to the VA. Get this idea that you're stigmatized out of your brain. You need mental help. Go get it. You need to find something that's going to improve the quality of your life. That was just a handful of in-your-face type phrases I use. I think, one, okay, back.
I remember the third question.
Okay.
I've never written a book, and you have several. So I'm curious as to how the process goes. Did you actually write everything out and then have somebody type it up and make it in a book? Or did you dictate to somebody and then
I wrote every word. I wrote on paper, napkins, paper towels. you name it. If I had an idea, I scribbled it. The number of times I woke up in the middle of the night, I remembered something. My logbook, my personnel file, my orders, my awards, all helped with the chronology. Once We Flew has been rewritten 20 times, 20, and it's 910 pages long. And you know what? There are probably about 200 corrections that I could make.
Yeah, I'm reading it right now, and now I understand why you used all abbreviations rather than writing out the words, because you had probably about 20 pages of abbreviations, and I was like, no, I'm not going to learn all this stuff. I'm just going to get to reading the book, you know.
Mm-hmm. I think it's, I think there are over 250,000 words in there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes. Do we have time? Mm-hmm. The story where the guy's name is Mike Herring. His last name is Herring. His nickname became Fish. He's in my memoir, I think 3 or 4 chapters. And the last time I mention him, there's a mini epilogue. And I tell them that Fish died in 1985. And I believe it was a heart attack. I researched that with the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association because they have a list of everybody. And there, Fish died after service, 1985. Okay. I loved Fish. If you read the book, you'll know why. I love those. It's that Band of Brothers thing, that mystique. Okay. 2022, March, on Facebook, I get a message. The reports of my demise are greatly exaggerated. Fish, XOXO. Holy shit. Honestly, Fish lives. He's alive. I could not respond to, when Linda came home, she saw, I was just excited. Okay, I'm going to send him a message. Fish, send me your phone number. I'll call you tomorrow at noon. I called him. Fish, is that you, Joey? Joey, is that you? That's the way he talked. We didn't miss a beat. I said, what are you doing alive? He knew he was carried as died after action, but he never, hell with it. He never changed it. So the memoir brought me and Fish back together. And then, long story short, then in July, Linda and I drove to his farm in Dead Center, Illinois, and we spent 2 days together reminiscing. So cool. Fish lives. Oh, yeah. Fish had some problems too, and we were talking about PTSD. I said, Fish, what do you have to lose? Go to the VA clinic. Get tested. And he did. And we spoke last week, and he has initiated the process. He's already started counseling. I go, yes, yes. Never too late. My bride is a nurse. So you can see how she helps me a lot.
I think we're at the end of I think we're at the end of our time. So please give Joe Sepesey, author, ballroom dancer, and decorated veteran.
Thank you.
A great big round of applause. Thank you so much to our audience
Charlie.
out there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's an honor to speak to you. Thank you.